Gene Burke has a follow-up. Go ahead.
Do you favor a temporary guest worker program?
Yes.
Mr. Paul first. Sorry.
Yes, I do. I think a temporary worker program is a good program. I think it should be done legal. They should be documented. And I think when you talk to most in the farming community, they will tell you that they do need the migrant workers to work on the farms.
Jack Conway.
I do think a temporary worker program, if done properly in conjunction with tough border security and a system that's sensible and fair, does make some sense. I also support trying to streamline the H-2A program through the United States Department of Agriculture to get some of the temporary workers to the farms where they can do some work that's desperately needed. So in certain instances like that where it's proven to work, I do support it.
This is a question from a WHAS TV viewer. There is much controversy on both sides of the fence about the current health care reform bill. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because there are many benefits in the current bill. So what specifically would you keep? What would you do away with? And what would you replace those portions with? Jack Conway, 60 seconds.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I tell you what's not the answer for health care is a $2,000 deductible for Medicare. Rand Paul has said that he wants a $2,000 deductible for Medicare. Our seniors simply cannot afford it. And he's also come out and said that we need to take all breast cancer research down to the local level. That's an issue where here at U of L, they get millions of dollars in breast cancer research funding. Jane Bashir got so hopping mad that she jumped on a conference call to tell everyone how upset she was about it. Here's what we need. We need to fix the health care law. Rand Paul wants to repeal it. You know, I have a friend who had a kidney transplant. He's had this kidney for about 18 years. And he's told me on numerous occasions how hard it is to get coverage because he has a pre-existing condition. We've got 19,000 kids in this state that are going to be kept on their parents' plan longer. There's some good things in the healthcare law. What we need to do is to step up in Medicare and allow Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices. That would save $200 billion. You need someone with a track record of taking on the pharmaceutical companies in order to do that.
60 seconds.
I'd get rid of the whole thing and start over. They went in the wrong direction. I'd get rid of the individual mandates. I'd get rid of the fines. I'd get rid of the 1099 provisions. Interestingly, while we've talked a lot about the deductible, or someone has, Obamacare did raise the deductible on those on Medicare already. So while I was talking about in the future we might have to, Jack's already in favor of raising the deductible. So's President Obama. They've already done it.
That's wrong.
Medicare Advantage already will have people paying nearly $1,000 more in out-of-pocket costs, and deductibles will rise under Obamacare. So don't be fooled.
Jack Conway, I'm going to let you respond, but I also want to know, the viewer asked, what specifically would you do away with in the health care bill? So answer that, and then you can respond to Mr. Paul.
Well, I think that this argument that he has come up with to try to get himself out from under the 7 different times that he said he was for a $2,000 deductible in Medicare, he came up with an argument in Paducah the other day that somehow a deductible is already being raised. Joe Girth of the Courier took a look at this and debunked that pretty thoroughly in a story this week. Here's what I would do away with. I would say this special interest provision where Medicare cannot negotiate for lower drug prices, which is $200 billion in savings. I think we ought to let Medicare negotiate for lower prices the way Medicaid does, the way the VA does. We also need Medicare fraud units in each and every state the way that we have them in Medicaid.
Okay, 30 seconds.
Actually, I read Joe Girth also all the time. And in Joe Girth's article, he quotes Richard Foster, actuary from CMS, to say, under Obamacare, deductibles will go up. You're absolutely incorrect on this.
Joe Arnold, question for Dr. Paul.
Dr. Paul, as you know, Kentucky is a net importer of federal dollars. You argue certainly for a different taxation system. You want more money kept at home, less money sent and filtered through Washington. But let's say you win and you're able to convince everybody in the Senate and the Congress of your plan. Is the net result for Kentucky going to be a lesser percentage of the federal pie?
All right. Actually, I think the statistic, if you take out those active military salaries and what we give to our bases, our numbers are disproportionately high because of having 2 big military bases and having a lot of active duty salaries in our state. You take that out, I don't think we get more than we send to Washington. Washington's a net loser for us, and we need to say it's a $2 trillion deficit. We need to figure out how to fix it, and that will require cuts across the board. We will have to look at every program and say, how do we balance this? We won't look at our soldiers, and that's why the soldiers should be taken out of the equation.
Jack.
Well, Joe, in Paducah the other day, Rand Paul came out for a 23% national sales tax. That would be on top of our regular sales tax. It's his plan. He wants to do away with the 16th Amendment and put in place this 23% national sales tax. So when you go to buy groceries, or you go to buy medicines, or you go to buy supplies, you're paying a 23% national sales tax. It would raise taxes on 90% of the people, and it would come down disproportionately hard on our seniors. And these are the seniors that would also get Rand Paul's $2,000 Medicare deductible. They just simply can't afford his plan.
I've said repeatedly that we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. We need to cut spending before we do anything to taxes. But you know what? We do need to simplify the tax code. It's 16,000 pages long. We need to simplify it, make it shorter. And I will support and do support many different approaches to reform the tax code as long as it reduces the overall burden for all taxpayers.
15 seconds, Jack Conway. You want to respond or not?
Well, he's been for the national sales tax repeatedly. He said he was for it again, 23% in Paducah, and then his campaign managers, one former and one current, got in an argument about it this week. And the bottom line is a 23% national sales tax would really hurt our seniors in addition to the $2,000 Medicare deductible that he's for.
Okay, Joe Girth from the Courier-Journal, question for General Conway.
General Conway, in the past 9 years, some 1,300 Americans have died in Afghanistan. The conditions on the ground there seem to be at times deteriorating. Do you believe this is a winnable war? How would you define that being a winnable war? And under what circumstances should we leave?
Well, it's a very good question. Thank you for it, Joe. Our men and women in uniform are serving so bravely over there. And I think it was the right thing to go in and displace the Taliban. But here's an instance of me breaking with the administration and being an independent-minded Kentucky Democrat. I questioned the surge in Afghanistan. I did so because I'm sick of hearing these politicians bang on the wood and say, win the war, win the war. What does it mean to win the war in Afghanistan? I think it means, simply stated, that we leave a country more stable than we found it and one that doesn't harbor terrorists bearing us ill will. And the reason I questioned the surge was because I didn't hear enough about Pakistan. You know, Pakistan is the neighbor that harbors the deadly combination of loose nuclear material and terrorists. And so we have to have a regional solution, and we have to handle this issue of nuclear proliferation. And this issue of nuclear proliferation is why I'm especially troubled that he has said that it's not a national security threat to the U.S. if Iran acquires one nuclear weapon. We have to be mindful of this.
Dr. Paul?
I've told people that if I am elected to the Senate, the most important vote I will ever take is on going to war. I think America should go to war reluctantly, and when we go to war, we should declare war as the Constitution intended. I think we haven't done that, and as a consequence, we haven't been unified as a nation. I would have voted to declare war on Afghanistan. I do think we do need to begin asking questions about when can we come home, when can the Afghans step up and do more to patrol the streets in their country.
Okay. Jack Conway, I think Joe Girth has a follow-up, I believe.
So do you believe that it is a winnable war? And if not, or if so, how do we get out?
Well, I think that we can meet those two criteria that I put forward, and that is leaving a country more stable than we found it and one that doesn't harbor terrorists that bear us ill will. But we're going to have to figure out a strategy that's an international strategy. The solution, Joe, is going to be a political one where countries like Pakistan and China and others step up, and our UN partners and NATO partners step up, so that we have an international solution to achieve the political ends that will allow us to get out in the near future.
Rand Paul,
should there be a timeline?
Go ahead.
I would like to see our troops starting to come home sometime next year.
Rand Paul, 30 seconds.
I think that we are very good at fighting war, but we're not very good at nation building. I think we need to ask the questions about that. There needs to be a national debate in the Senate and in the halls of the media as well. We need to have a debate about when we should come home. I think ultimately the commander-in-chief makes those decisions, though, and I don't think that Congress can vote to move troops around. I think it actually would be unconstitutional for Congress to tell him he has to have 100,000 troops here or 100,000 troops there.
Greg Stottlemyre, question for Dr. Paul.
Dr. Paul, you've expressed local first when it comes to spending tax dollars, yet considering the corruption that has been rampant in parts of eastern Kentucky, do you believe sending massive amounts of tax dollars without federal control is the best way to attack our state's drug problem?
But the interesting thing, and I think this debate has been mistaken from the very beginning as if it's an all or none, there's a continuum between federal funding and local and state funding. But the interesting thing, if you talk to a sheriff in any county and ask them what percentage of your money is state and what percent and local and what is federal, it's well over 90% in every community is state and local funding. So it's funny that we're having this debate as if I'm proposing some dramatic change in what we do. What we do now is the vast majority of the funding is state and local.
Mr. Conway?
Well, I don't know what Kentucky he's looking at. I was interested to read the paper this morning to see that Hal Rogers, who I've actually worked with on Operation Unite, say that he was very disappointed in Rand Paul's stance when it came to funding Operation Unite. And I can assure you Operation Unite is not 90% federally funded. I can assure you that the Penny Ryle Area Task Force that Congressman Whitfield has brought funding home for is not locally funded. I can assure you that the sheriffs that I met with in Central Kentucky who say they would lose 1 or 2 full-time drug investigators under your plan are very concerned about it. Drugs are indeed a pressing issue in Kentucky.
Dr. Paul?
Well, let me explain this. Federal programs would be federally funded. They're 100% federally funded. But if you take the federal money in a county and you add up the local money in the county, it's less than 10% of the money. The sheriff's office in any county collects the vast majority of the money, and a very small percentage is federal. I want more autonomy with the local sheriff, and I want more autonomy with local drug courts because I want to make reasonable decisions. I don't think we should lock up a teenager for 10 years for possession of drugs. I think we need to have a more reasoned and reasonable approach to the drug problem.
30 seconds.
Yeah. This is an issue that I understand, and it's an instance where I get Kentucky and Rand Paul doesn't get Kentucky. As the Attorney General, I've literally traveled through Eastern Kentucky, and I've had parents cry on my shoulder because their children have overdosed from OxyContin. So for you to stand up and say that drugs aren't a pressing issue and say that you wouldn't seek federal assistance, I think is callous. And I think it's problematic for the people of Eastern Kentucky, including the partnership that we have in the AG's office with local governments, with the federal governments. This is an all-hands-on-deck situation.
Okay, Gene Burke, question for Mr. Conway.
As a way to attack the deficit, you can either cut programs and save money or raise taxes to generate income. As far as Kentucky is concerned, what is your view on downsizing Fort Knox and Fort Campbell as a way to cut spending?
Oh, I'm not for that. I'm not for that. I was in Fort Knox just the other day, meeting with the core group, and actually the Base Realignment Commission, BRAC down there, has a plan moving forward for Fort Knox that's very exciting. They're actually going to triple the number of officers. There's incredible investment down there, and the people in and around Fort Knox are very excited for their future. And I was in Hopkinsville the other night too, and they're certainly standing by Fort Campbell. I'm a fiscally responsible Democrat, Gene. I balanced my budget 8 times. And if you go to my website, you'll see that we have very specific proposals for how we can trim about $500 billion in spending. First, we go to Medicare bulk purchasing, which saves about $200 billion. There's about $100 billion in Medicare fraud out there that we could get if we had Medicare fraud units in each and every state. And if we were to shut down the offshore tax loopholes and offshore tax havens that my opponent supports, there's about $130 billion in savings. We also need the pay-as-you-go system that President Clinton put in place, and we also need a bipartisan debt commission to get back to us with some recommendations.
Dr. Paul?
I'm not for cutting funds for Fort Knox or for Fort Campbell. Both of them are ranked in the top 20 bases that the military has decided are the top 20 most important bases. So I think we have a very good chance that Fort Knox and Fort Campbell will stay in Kentucky, and I'm in favor of that. With regard to what we do, it's a spending problem in Washington. You're going to need some serious people to go up there and look at every program across the board and say, can we downsize it? Can we make it smaller? Can we privatize some programs? But we have to be serious about this, and it's going to take serious people to balance the budget.
Okay, next question comes from an audience member. Robert Keller asks, where do you stand on the location of the new VA hospital for Louisville? Dr. Paul, you go first. 60 seconds.